There is a rhythm in the rising of nations, just as there is a drumbeat in the feet of marching people. History does not sleep. It moves, it pulses, it remembers. And in this grand parade of power and pride, a giant stirs, eyes open, voice steady and vision clear. The world watches as China steps into the storm, not with trembling but with the full weight of 1 billion hearts beating like thunder in the chest of a sleeping dragon awakened. There is a certain illusion many hold, that great power appears overnight, sudden and spectacular, as if strength is gifted rather than earned. But true power is born from pain, from long patience, from centuries of being overlooked and underestimated. What we now see rising in the East is not a random storm, it is the return of something ancient, something rooted in memory, struggle and silent resilience. China's rise did not begin yesterday, and it was not a result of mere economic strategies. It is the outcome of endurance, of a people who bore humiliation and hardship with their heads held high and their hopes unbroken. This strength we witness today was carved through the era of colonialism, when the East was dismissed and dissected, its resources pillaged and its dignity denied. Yet, even as the world tried to rewrite its story, China kept writing its own. They rebuilt in silence, while others danced loudly in their own victories. They studied their oppressors not to mimic them, but to understand how to transcend them. The dynasties may have fallen, the emperors may be gone, but the spirit, the unbending spine of the people, never vanished. That spirit lay hidden, not weak but waiting. Generations passed down not just culture or language, but a memory of who they were before they were reduced to shadows by the West. They remembered the Silk Roads, the great inventions, the philosophies that once led the world, and that memory became fuel. In the face of Western dominance, China didn't just resist, it observed, it learned. It gathered strength where there was none and planted vision where the soil was barren. With every embargo they found another way. With every insult they found deeper resolve. And with every sanction they carved out self-reliance. This awakening of China is not a threat to global peace. It is a mirror reflecting back decades of one-sided power. The fear many express today does not come from acts of aggression, but from the realization that the world is no longer unipolar. The old powers see the old game no longer plays by their rules. The rise of China means that decisions once made in Western boardrooms must now pass through Asian hands. It means the voice of the East can no longer be ignored, spoken over, or conveniently mistranslated. While the West threw its power into warfare and influence, China sowed its energy into progress and infrastructure. They invested in the future while others clung to the past. They paved roads, built megacities, and lifted millions out of poverty, all while being told they couldn't. The dragon did not roar. It watched. It prepared. And now as its breath grows warm, it doesn't rage. It ascends. So when leaders in faraway capitals panic or posture, they are not reacting to an enemy. They are reacting to the shifting tide of history. Because history, like a river, always flows toward balance. Those who once built dams to control it are now watching the water rise around them. And in that water is the reflection of a people who refused to drown, who learned to swim in silence, and who are now sailing into the center of the world's attention. Strength such as this cannot be denied, for it has been earned in silence and sharpened in fire. It has grown through generations of waiting, and now it moves not to dominate but to declare that it is no longer content to stand in the shadows. Power is not always announced by the thunder of missiles or the glare of parades. Sometimes it whispers through the hands of those who toil without titles and build without recognition. In China's rise, we do not see a sudden eruption of might, but the quiet, persistent work of generations who turned struggle into strength and discipline into dominance. While many watched for loud declarations and grand speeches, real transformation was taking place in factories, laboratories, classrooms, and villages. This was not the kind of power that demanded attention, it earned it. The misconception about power is that it must be visible, loud, and immediate. But in truth, power built on a solid foundation does not rush to prove itself. It lets its work speak. China, once called the sleeping giant, was never truly asleep. It was waking slowly, deliberately, laying each brick with care. While others flexed their muscles in conflicts abroad, China was investing in education, technology, and industrial growth. The arms it was building were not just mechanical, they were intellectual, economic, cultural, and digital. Its rise was not only in steel and concrete, but in the minds and hearts of a billion people who dared to dream that they would no longer be dictated to. This dream was not stitched together in conference rooms or written in the language of conquest. It was built in the hands of farmers learning how to mechanize their work, children studying STEM in rural classrooms, doctors creating cures from both ancient wisdom and modern science. It was the taxi driver who learned to use digital payments before the world caught up, the engineer who developed green tech while the rest of the world debated climate politics. This is the strength of a people who adapt, who absorb, and who refuse to be left behind. China's vision was never just about catching up. It was about redefining what it means to lead. Where some nations used their dominance to destabilize others, China used its influence to stabilize its own destiny. The Belt and Road Initiative was more than a trade project. It was a declaration of presence, a statement that their future would not be handed to them but crafted by them. While many viewed trade as a weapon, China saw it as a bridge. And those bridges, laid stone by stone, now stretch across continents. There is a wisdom and restraint, and China practiced it well. In a world addicted to immediate gratification and visible triumphs, China moved with patience. It was not moved by applause, nor swayed by provocation. It focused on building a foundation deep enough to withstand storms, and high enough to inspire. That is why, when others falter under the weight of their own arrogance, China appears composed, because it was never racing anyone. It was walking its own path, one step at a time. And now, when others look on with surprise, even fear, they are not reacting to aggression. They are reacting to the realization that something powerful has taken shape outside of their control. It is not the roar of jets or the size of a navy that startles them. It is the sight of a nation that rose not through force but through focus, a country that made patience a strategy and silence a strength. Such power does not need validation. It does not knock on the doors of approval. It simply stands, confident and undeniable, because the hands that built in darkness now reveal what they have made in the light. And in that revelation is not just the story of a nation. It is the story of what becomes possible when people believe in their own strength, more than they believe in the limits placed upon them. The world has long been divided by an uneven weight of power, an order shaped not by fairness but by force. For decades, decisions were made in distant rooms where few were invited and many were affected. Those who held the pen wrote the rules, and those without it were expected to obey. But that old world is fading, and in its place emerges a new rhythm, a balance being restored not by favor but by will. China's rise is not merely an economic phenomenon or a political shift. It is a reawakening of dignity, a powerful reassertion of identity by a people who refuse to let history be written without them. For too long, the global table was set by those who had no intention of sharing the feast. The dominant nations controlled trade, dictated values, and enforced their models of governance under the guise of democracy and freedom. Yet beneath that polished rhetoric often lay exploitation, military presence, and cultural erasure. In such an environment, China's emergence is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of restoration. It is the reclaiming of a voice long silenced, a place long denied, and a future long deferred. This transformation is not only about policies and partnerships, it is about perspective. It challenges the assumption that power only belongs to the few. It forces a reckoning with the idea that the West is the sole custodian of modernity and morality. China is not asking permission to lead. It is leading in its own way, on its own terms. And that assertion makes many uncomfortable, not because it is dangerous but because it is unfamiliar. The center of gravity is shifting, and with it comes a necessary change in the global consciousness. Those who have grown accustomed to dominance often mistake independence for defiance. But what we see in China's stance is not aggression, it is confidence. confidence rooted in a civilization thousands of years old, rich in philosophy, science, poetry, and statecraft. That civilization, once fractured and colonized, has not only survived but reassembled itself. The message it now sends to the world is simple: we are not your copy, we are not your shadow, we are ourselves, and we are enough. The rise of China marks a broader turning point in history. It signals that the global South is finding its footing, that multipolarity is not only possible but necessary. The weight of progress no longer rests solely on the shoulders of Western institutions. It now belongs to many hands, many cultures, many dreams. In that expansion lies hope, not just for one nation but for all who have been marginalized, overlooked, or underestimated. This is not about East replacing West, or one empire replacing another. It is about creating space for every nation to be more than a subordinate in someone else's vision. It is about sovereignty of thought, of voice, of destiny. China's rise challenges the idea that there is only one right way to govern, to grow, to lead. And in doing so, it opens the door for others to do the same. When we talk about China challenging the old order, we must understand that it does so not through bombs and invasions, but through trade, infrastructure, diplomacy, and innovation. That is what truly unsettles those who once shaped the world unopposed. The old order trembles not at tanks, but at the thought of no longer being the sole author of the future. And that tremble is not the beginning of war, it is the beginning of awakening. Panic, at its root, is not a show of power, but a sign of loss. Loss of control, loss of dominance, and loss of certainty. When leaders accustomed to shaping the world unchallenged begin to feel the ground shifting beneath their feet, they do not respond with wisdom, they respond with fear. And fear often wears the mask of outrage. What we are witnessing in the voices of certain Western leaders is not a reaction to hostility, but to the growing presence of a nation that no longer asks to be included. It demands to be respected. That presence, calm and calculated, reveals a truth many are not ready to face. The days of one-sided rule are fading into history. The anxiety radiating from powerful nations is not about military threats alone. It is about influence: who has it, who's gaining it, and who's losing it. For years the narrative of progress was written in Western ink, shaped by values that others were expected to adopt without question. China's quiet yet persistent refusal to follow that script has unsettled those who once held the narrative tight in their fists. Now they see a country that builds its own story, invests in its own path, and grows without asking for validation. That kind of self-direction does not fit neatly into the old playbook of global politics. And so it is fear. This fear finds expression in sanctions, in media distortions, in aggressive postures and diplomatic games. But beneath all of it lies one emotion: uncertainty. The Western world has long operated with a sense of inherited superiority, believing its systems, values, and methods to be the final word on governance and prosperity. Yet here stands a country that has taken a different road and still reached a place of strength, stability, and success. That contradiction is what causes panic, because if China can thrive without mimicking the West, then perhaps the West is not the sole blueprint for development. And if that is true, the world must reconsider its assumption. The reaction to China's rise is not really about China. It is about what China represents. It represents the possibility of another way. It represents a threat not to freedom but to monopoly, monopoly of ideas, culture, economics, and vision. And monopolies do not break quietly. They shout, they warn, they demonize. But shouting cannot stop a wave, it cannot reverse the wind. The more they panic, the more obvious it becomes that they feel the change coming, and they know they cannot contain it. And so they call confidence aggression. They label development domination. They accuse progress of being a provocation. But the world is watching, and the world is wiser now. Many nations once caught in the crossfire of empires now understand what it means to be misrepresented and misunderstood. They see China's rise not as a lone event, but as a symbol of something broader, a rebalancing of global voices, a turning of the tide where power is no longer dictated but shared. The posture of panic is loud, but it is also revealing. It shows who is truly strong and who is shaken. Strength walks steadily. It does not need to convince. It does not tremble when others grow. And that is what we are seeing now. A measured stride. A focused vision. A leadership that speaks through action. While panic reaches for headlines and echoes of the past, strength builds for the future. In that contrast lies the truth. Not of who shouts loudest, but of who stands tallest when the world begins to listen. The world does not change with noise alone. It changes with awakening when people once silent or silenced begin to see themselves clearly, not through the lens of their oppressors but through the clarity of their own worth. What we witness today is not the rise of a new empire but the awakening of a people long told their place was beneath, not beside the powers that be. This is not the shout of aggression, it is the steady voice of awareness, and in that voice is a message that stretches beyond borders, beyond politics, beyond fear. The future is no longer reserved for a few, it belongs to those who dare to shape it. China's ascent speaks not only of strength but of sovereignty. It is a reminder to every nation that the script handed to them is not the only story that can be told. And when a people awaken to their own potential, the world must shift to make space for that truth. This moment is not only a geopolitical event, it is a moral reckoning. For too long, decisions about justice, growth and leadership have been made without the voices of those most affected. Now the balance is changing not by accident but by intention. This awakening is not a threat to global peace. It is an invitation to reimagine global harmony. It calls on the world to move from hierarchy to partnership, from dominance to dialogue. Those who fear China's rise are not fearing war. They are fearing the end of their monopoly on power. But the world is vast, and its possibilities cannot be contained by outdated maps. The East is no longer looking for approval from the West. It is looking ahead, focused on progress, peace and the prosperity of its own people. And in that awakening, there is a lesson for every nation. That lesson is this: you do not need permission to rise. You do not need to imitate those who once stood above you. You need only the courage to build from within, to invest in your own, to believe that your culture, your voice, your way of life is not inferior, but essential to the mosaic of human progress. China's example shows that development does not require submission. It requires vision, discipline, and unity. The West is not being replaced, it is being rebalanced. The global future is not about one power leading all. It is about many powers rising together, each bringing their perspective, their wisdom, their innovations. And in that diversity lies a deeper strength. For too long, strength was confused with control. But real strength lies in cooperation.